Welcome to Good Boards, the Basics. My name is Dr. Ange-Marie Hancock. I'm an associate professor at the University of Southern California, CEO of Resist, and a proud AABLI alumna. I'm thrilled to be able to introduce you to Virgil Roberts, whom I've known since 2011 when he participated in some of the research I did on giving black in Los Angeles. Virgil is a partner in the law firm Bobbitt & Roberts, and he is chairman of the publicly traded Broadway Federal Bank. In addition to that, he sits on several other boards, including the James Irvine Foundation, Southern California Public Radio, and as you will get to know, he is one of the co-founders and chairman of the board for the African American Board Leadership Institute. He's a California native, and I'm thrilled to be able to turn now to talking to him about good boards. So, I know you don't like me to call you Mr. Virgil.
No, I don't.
So Virgil,
That's better.
Can you tell us about the African American Board Leadership Institute? Why, and what really led you in particular to found this organization?
So what really led me in particular to found the organization is people asking me to be on boards. And I said, I'm on enough, I can't do any more. And then they would say, well, can you recommend to us someone sort of like you, meaning somebody black, to be on our board? And what I began to realize is that, one, most of the people that I knew were sort of my vintage, and I didn't know a lot of people that could be on boards. And one of the things I've learned over the years about business, if it's nobody's job to do it, it doesn't get done. So I've been talking with Yvette about a project that we could maybe do together. And so I looked around for a while trying to find a place where I could find board members, couldn't find one. Mm-hmm. And so I said, that's what we should do. We should start an organization that will really create a pipeline of African Americans who've been trained for board service, who are ready to serve. And then I can answer the question, if someone said, can you recommend somebody to our board? I could say, call this number, the African American Board Leadership Institute, and you can find good people. So really it was like so many things that happen in private and public life. It started because of a perceived need that was impacting me personally.
And I know that there are other organizations around the country who do this, but not necessarily just focused on African Americans. And so why the African American Board Leadership Institute instead of the people of color or some other kind of framework?
Yeah, well, the reason for making it the African American and not just people of color is there's a lot of evidence, and I think we've seen it from a result. There's a lot of evidence that groups that are homogeneous sometimes learn better. And one of the issues about being on a board where we're trying to get people placed is if you're the only African American, you may have a question about how can I be an effective board member and not be seen as playing the race card? Mm-hmm. And so there are questions that oftentimes affect African Americans. Same can be true of women, it can be true of gay and lesbians, that it's unique to them that they don't want to discuss in a diverse setting. So what we've learned is that by putting together our group of people, a group of intelligent African Americans, a lot of personal issues that would not be discussed in a diverse setting, we're able really to get at it. So people can say, how can I be effective and not be seen as playing the race card? And that's conversation that we're able to have. The other thing that we found is what I call the Morehouse effect. And that simply is that when you have a group of intelligent black professionals together, so often they're in settings where they're the only one. It can really be affirming to find there are other people like me who are working, where they're investment bankers, doctors, lawyers, or whatever. There are other people like me that have the same sort of interests, and it's really great to get to know them and to work at something together. And what you get is you get an enhanced learning that takes place in that sort of circumstance.
So it sounds like AABLI does kind of two different things, right? I mean, it certainly serves the organizations who might be looking to diversify their boards, but it also really provides a certain resource for that personal need, which you know is not unique to you.
That's correct. And so what we're really doing is as much leadership training as it is board service. I think people come away from the experience feeling that they've been equipped with tools that will make them more effective in their organizations. And if they happen to serve on a board, it'll make them more effective on the boards on which they serve.
I think that's a really interesting point. And you mentioned earlier that you belong to a lot of boards, and I think right now it's at 10. So tell us what you're looking for when you get those requests, or why you stay on all 10.
Well, yeah, I don't know why I stay on all 10, but I'll tell you how I got there. There's a personal thing that I go through and I encourage everybody to do, and that is, what are you passionate about? So the first screen for me in usually selecting a board is this an organization that is doing something that if I had a job and I was going to do it 24/7, I would do this, you know? And so it can be an organization like a Families in Schools that works with poor and immigrant parents to help them become more effective with the education of their kids. It can be an organization like the Alliance for College-Ready Public Schools, where we're building charter schools. And so generally what, I'm an unrepentant do-gooder. And so there are a lot of things that I think are important to make our society better. So my first cut is this something that I'm really interested in doing?
Okay.
Then beyond that, what I usually tell people, when you're selecting a nonprofit organization, you should make sure that it's a good organization. You know, I don't think it's a good idea to try and join an organization to save it. I think what you want to do is you want to join an organization that is already healthy, that is fulfilling the mission that you're after. So, you know, you want to look at their 990s. You want to see financial statements. You want to know who's on the board. You want to know who's the chair of the board. You want to know something about the staff, who's the executive director. And I think you should interview an organization and really find out about its financial health. You want to find out from the organization, how do board members relate to each other? Is it an there that's healthy in the sense of it encourages participation of board members? There are a lot of organizations where someone will start, and you hear people all the time talk about my nonprofit.
Right, right.
And if you get attracted to somebody and they say, come join my nonprofit, that's a board I would not join. Because a nonprofit organization is for the public benefit, not for the benefit of the founder. And if somebody begins to think of it as their organization, then you're not going to be able to do the job you need to do as a board member, which is to provide oversight and to really be responsible for evaluating the person who is your CEO or your executive director. So, it's a long-winded answer to say, in selecting an organization, one, it should be something you're passionate about, something you'd want to do, so that it makes sense to you to go to the meetings. Two, you want to make sure that it's an organization that's relatively healthy. And three, you want to make sure it's an organization where the leader is committed to being overseen by a board, so that you're joining a board that can really do its job.
So I want to drill down a little bit on the idea of looking at the finances and also the fundraising element that often is involved with boards. So usually when we talk about philanthropy, and I'm sure other people know this and you know this, we're talking about giving your time, your talent, and your treasure. Too often we talk about time and talent, and we don't necessarily talk about the treasure part. So could you talk a little bit about that element in your calculus?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about it. So let me explain one about the 990. 990 is it's a tax return that every nonprofit has to file. So if they haven't filed one, that's a warning signal that it's an organization that maybe you don't want to be involved with.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you look at the 990, it tells you how much money the organization has raised. It tells you who the major donors are. It's really a good snapshot of how the organization is doing financially. And so that's something you should always ask for. When you join a nonprofit organization, one of the things that you're going to be expected to do beyond just doing the oversight and stuff is it's really your job as a board to help the organization succeed. And with nonprofits, it's always an issue of raising money. You can't get away from the need of raising money. Now, part of what we do in the Institute, the training that all of you are going to receive, is to talk about fundraising.
Right.
And one of the things that I think we will help you understand is that there is an element of commitment, and most middle class folks have more money than they think they have. Like someone will say, well, you've got to get $5,000 to be on this board. People immediately say, I don't have that kind of money. But then if you're really committed to what the organization is doing, and you think about the latte you get every day for $4 or $5.
Absolutely.
And if you said, this is important enough to me that I'm going to give that up, well, that $5 a day cup of coffee becomes $25 a week, and it's $100 a month, and all of a sudden there's $1,200 that you have just from giving up coffee. You're not missing your rent, you're not doing other things. And so I oftentimes think that people don't realize that they have as many potential options to raise money personally and to talk to their friends. And so what we try and do in our training program, and as you go through the board leadership program, you'll learn more about the need to figure out techniques to raise money. It's not as hard as people think if it's something you're committed to do. So when you serve on a board, not only do you have to raise money, but you also have to be present.
Yes.
And that's why it's so important that you join organizations for which you have a passion, because the being present is oftentimes the way in which you really support the work of an organization. And that means showing up at meetings. It also means that it's your obligation, if the organization is running the various programs, you should be have time to show up from time to time to be present. And around the boardroom table, decisions are made by those who are present.
Right.
That's one of the beauties of a nonprofit organization is I oftentimes think of them as like venture capitalists for social change. And so the kinds of issues that you focus on, the kinds of work that you do, it's totally determined by the members of the board. And if you're not there, you don't have a voice.
So it sounds like there's this fourth element, both that was key to you forming AABLI, but also that folks should think about in terms of the number of boards. Right. I'm now on 6, and so I'm not trying to get in the double digits.
Right.
But no, really thinking about that element of how much time can I dedicate, as much as kind of the fundraising component. And so thinking about that fundraising component and being strategic about it. When should someone talk about that, when they're being asked to join a board or evaluating the opportunity?
Well, one of the things you want to know when you join a board is what's the expectation of the organization of you as a board member. And you should ask about meetings, board meetings, committee meetings, activities, what kind of time is expected of you as a board member to participate. You should ask about the finances, what is expected of you in terms of give or get or supporting the organization financially. And what I always like to know is what's how does the board operate to allow you to be involved in the iterative process of what a board is going to do. Okay. You don't, for me, I don't want to be on an organization where I'm a rubber stamp, where there's somebody that's already decided what we're going to do, and the real reason you want me to be on the board is to help raise money to support what somebody else has decided that they want to do. I like to have some input into making decisions about strategy and goals, et cetera, of the organization. And my sense is that most people do too.
Of course.
You know, the way you get the best board members is to have people engaged in the work of the board. And the best organizations are those that make use of their board members to be engaged in their work. Busy people, people who have resources, and people who respect their time will very quickly decide, if you don't need me to participate in conversations, then maybe you don't need me to be involved with this organization.
Right.
And I've joined boards that I thought were going to be great, and after serving for a while, I said, no, this is not a board. They don't really need my time or want my time, so I'm not going to spend time here.
Right. And I mean, I think the element of time is also interesting when you think about the idea of you should actually prepare for your board meetings. And we don't really talk about that. I mean, we are fiduciarily responsible when we join a board.
Yes.
And so we should invest the time in preparing to read whatever documents, right?
Yeah, and what I think is, again, it goes to my view that you should do what you're passionate about, because now you're not reading for work, you're reading for your own interest. You're interested in the work of the organization. And so the materials that you're sent to review before a board meeting should relate to what the organization is doing. And if you're interested in what the organization is doing, then it's not the same sort of tedious work as, you know, studying for, I don't know, an English exam or history exam or science exam. So your job as a board member is to be prepared, and we really try and emphasize that with AABLI. One of the things that can help solve the issue of, I'm the only African American on a board, how do I fit into the culture? Well, if you happen to be the one board member who's always prepared, because on most boards, most people are not always prepared.
Sure.
So if you're always prepared, you read the material, then what begins to happen is people begin to see that you're making a contribution as a board member. That gives you some legitimacy, gives you some credibility with your fellow board members. And they will say, oh, you know, Ange-Marie, you know, she's really on it. So if she raises her hand to make a comment, it's probably going to be substantive. As opposed to somebody who raises their hand and makes a comment, and then you learn that the answer to your question was on page 3 of the memo that was sent to you before the board before the board meeting. So by raising your hand and asking the question, what you've really done is you've demonstrated that you're not prepared and you're not committed to the organization in a way, and it diminishes your standing amongst your fellow board members.
So I want to ask a little bit about some of those key responsibilities for board members that really focus on kind of how they select and supervise the CEO. And then, are there any red flags to watch out for with the board?
So when you're new to a board, you know, if you think about what the responsibility of a board is, it really is to hire a CEO, to evaluate the CEO, to understand the finances of the board, to create policies and help find the resources for the organization. So what I usually tell folks when they're going to join a board is, don't just be flattered that people have asked you, but make sure you ask questions. One of the questions you want to know is, how do we evaluate the CEO?
Right.
You know, is the board involved in the process? Is the chairman of the board the only one that does it? Do we get some sort of feedback about the performance of the CEO? How do we do it? And you should have some understanding of what that process is and what your role as a board member is in that process. The best performing boards also evaluate themselves, you know, and you know, the question that you want to ask is our board, is the board of this organization I'm joining, what do we do to make sure that as a board we're doing our job? And there are a lot of simple tools and surveys that you can use as an organization to find out what exactly the board is doing to evaluate the CEO and to evaluate it itself. And then you want to know, does the organization have a strategic plan?
Right.
Where are we trying to go? What are we trying to do? And there should be, it's a good discipline for the organization. It's a good discipline for the executive director to have some sort of plan about where you're going. And there should be a process that all the board members are aware of about how we decide upon that plan and when we do it and how we do it. So red flags are, well, we've never evaluated our CEO.
Does this link back to the my nonprofit thing too that you mentioned earlier?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
You know, that's why I always say when you sit down with the executive director or president of an organization and they talk about my nonprofit, my general view is that's an organization I probably don't want to be involved with.
Right.
Because if we get to a decision point where the CEO thinks one thing and the board thinks another thing, she's going to say, well, this is my organization and you all should leave. And so that's not productive. And so, you know, so what you want is a well-performing organization usually is pretty transparent about how it operates. You want to know if there are committees. Do they meet? Is there an audit committee? Do you have audited financials? Do you have a finance committee that looks at the budget? If it's an organization that runs robust programs, is there a committee of the board that really looks at the quality of the program offerings that are being done? Because you can't give a lot of time, and so. You know, as a practical matter, you know, most boards may meet quarterly, so you need committees of board members that are looking deeper into an organization, and then those committees then come back and sort of report to the full board, and that gives you a sense as a board member. Well, I'm not on the audit committee, but I know some people who know finances are.
Right.
You know,
Gives you some sense of trust.
Some sense of trust. And that's why it's important for you to know your other board members. I always think that it's important if you're going to join a board that you spend some time meeting at least the chairman of the board and one or two other board members to get their sense of what the organization is like, and for you to have a sense, are these people that I want to, you know, sit down and break bread with and work on problems together, because there is a board culture usually, and you want to know something about that culture, and so you want to ask questions to find out.
So let's talk a little bit about this do-good case study that everyone has to read over and kind of answer questions about. I'm going to give you two questions, but the first question is really around this idea of what's one issue that you would have identified from the case study that really raises red flags that the people in the Institute should really have drawn out, or if they haven't yet, you're going to help them?
Well, I'm not going to help them because I want them to draw it out. But what you want to look at things like when you have an executive director and there's a small group of people who are making decisions.
Okay.
You know,
meaning a subset of the board
a
kind of thing?
A subset of the board.
Okay.
You know, board should be transparent, and you want to be careful there's not a small group of people who are making decisions. So you want to look at that. You want to look at if the board is doing something that might be a conflict of interest.
Okay.
You know, if you see an organization where they have a fundraiser, but the consultants who are responsible for putting on the fundraiser and things happen to have ties to a leadership on the staff. You know, you want to make sure that those things are done in an arm's length way, and that there aren't any problems. There are always, if you think about an organization, the areas where you're going to have problems in the nonprofit area usually are around money, you know, and usually around ethics.
Right.
You know, and the ethics being things like conflict of interest, how board members are selected, you know, how committees are run, how vendors are selected, how the money is spent, and how the money is raised. I think if you use good sense and, you know, what seems fair and right in your gut, then in looking at that situation, you'll be able to identify issues.
Well, good. I'm glad, as a professor, never give the students the answer.
That's right.
I did want to ask a question, though, about both the Do Good case study, but also kind of more generally.
Yeah.
And I've observed this on my own board that I've been a member of. There have been occasions, as you mentioned before, where you're the only black person or you're one of a select number of people of color on a board. And I have seen microaggressions take place. And so I'm just curious, I know that you deal with them in the workplace and you have a certain set of, kind of protocols. But think about process and talk about how it might work on a board or how we should think about it more broadly when it applies to boards.
Yeah, so when you're on a board, I mean, look, boards are not separated from society, okay? So racism, sexism, those things that exist in the broader society, they will also exist in the boardroom, and, like somebody saying to you, oh, that's a nice comment, little lady, There's certain kinds of put downs that people will use. And I think what you have to learn, and I think Zach does an excellent job in our program of talking about how do you respond to some of the microaggression.
Right.
So, I mentioned earlier in the conversation we're having that one of the things that sometimes can help you as a board member is to make sure you read all the materials and you're expert on the board. So one of the great ways at getting at some of those things is to say, we need to evaluate ourselves as a board.
Right.
And in the course of the board evaluation, which is usually done in an anonymous way, gives you an opportunity to write out criticisms that you've seen and things that you think ought to be changed and bring it to the attention of the board. Now, I can give you an example of a board I'm on now, the James Irvine Foundation. We did a board evaluation, and there were some board members who felt, we think that not everybody is being heard. We're not as transparent as we should be. And so the foundation has actually gone through a process of, we hired an outside consultant. We really looked at our committee structure and other things to really change some of the ways that we do business, some of the ways that we interact. And so to me, that's a very powerful example of what can happen if the board does an annual evaluation. So if you're on the board and you have this sense things are going wrong and you don't want to raise your hand and say, I think that was a sexist comment.
Right.
Or I think that was a racist comment. There are a couple of things that you can do beyond just saying, let's do a board evaluation, because that's an annual thing. You might also talk to some of your other board members that you become friends with,
Right.
and see if they have the same reaction. A lot of times you can have somebody speak on your behalf, to take away the tinge of it being racist. It's sort of like, that comment, I really felt that was inappropriate. And if you have a white colleague who says, I agree with that, then the white colleague may lead the conversation. It keeps you from playing the race card, but it allows the issue to have discussion amongst the full board in an executive sessions where it ought to take place. But I think, as I think people will learn from Zachary, there are a number of techniques like that.
Right.
Having a partner on the board that you can do things together, doing the board evaluation. And then finally, I think that if you as a board member really work to establish your bona fides, that's why I say, you read the material, you're expert on other areas where the board begins to think of you in a certain way, and you have legitimacy with your other board members, that then gives you some currency if you feel you need to speak out and say, well, we're seeing all these demonstrations around on college campuses about microaggression. I think some of the conversation we just had is an illustration, and we may take that as a learning moment for us as an organization. So you can do it in a way that's non-confrontational, but it becomes a teachable moment. And that's a technique that I think you could use.
So a lot of what you've been saying is really talking about process.
Yes.
And you know, I think you're right with Zach's session, you start to learn how you can build solidarity, you know, you can observe those moments and, you know, the conversations that take place in the parking lot
Right.
afterwards where you can
Right.
affirm, you're not crazy, I'm not crazy, we both just saw the same thing. But I want to talk very formally about the idea of Robert's Rules of Order as an element of that process. So what is it? Why is it important to know it? Why do so many boards function underneath these processes?
Well, so most boards that I've been on, they don't use Robert's Rules of Order.
Interesting.
Because I think most people don't know Robert's Rules of Order.
Ah.
The very first indication that people don't know Robert's Rules of Order is when they vote on the minutes. And most people will say, all right, we have the minutes, you've seen the minutes, can I get a motion to approve the minutes? And under Robert's Rules of Order, you don't need a motion to approve the minutes. You know, if there are no additions or corrections, the chairman can just deem the minutes approved. It's interesting because when I was in high school, I took a leadership class. We had a leadership class in which we studied Robert's Rules of Order. I think it's good to know Robert's Rules of Order,
Right.
because there are times when an organization can get bogged down in the process, and if you know the Rules of Order, you can then make suggestions about how the meeting ought to be conducted. You know, if you have really contentious issues, the Robert's Rules of Order help you deal with amendments to motions and all those sorts of things. And I think it's an important thing to have in your toolkit just because it makes you a more knowledgeable board member maybe than your peers.
Right.
And I always think if you are the minority person, anything you can do to establish that you're more expert than your peers can be helpful to you in actually conducting the meeting and establishing how you relate to other members of the board. So I think it's important to know, but I wouldn't dwell on it because, as I said, I've been on lots and lots of boards over the last 40 years, and I can't think of a single one that followed Robert's Rules of Order.
Do you think that, you mentioned that it's not that they wouldn't, it's that they don't know
They
it.
don't know it.
And so do you think that it's an effective way to perhaps introduce a board to kind of process? I'm just thinking about that very healthy kind of process James Irvine just went through. You know, would that be helpful in those kinds of contentious conversations?
In a contentious conversation, Robert's Rules of Order are absent. That's why they exist.
Ah,
You know,
okay.
the Rules of Order were created so you have order in conducting meetings. And if you get in the Irvine situation, it wasn't as much that it was contentious,
Right.
as much as there was a sense that people had that decisions were being made by a smaller group of people, not by the
Got
full
it.
board.
Okay.
Like, how did she become chair of that committee, or why is he going to be the next chair? You know, that sort of thing. So what we tried to do was to reduce the size of committees, expand involvement of the committees, make the process more transparent about everything that we're doing
Right.
as an organization. But, you know, for the people who are going through our class, we talk about Robert's Rules of Order. We give people copies of the Robert's Rules of Order book. And I think it's a good tool to have in your toolkit. But if you tried to go to most organizations and say, wait a second, we're not following Robert's Rules of Order, they probably want to hold you out of order for trying to establish order. But if you know it, I think it's something valuable to know.
So the last question I really want to ask you is kind of how do you answer the question, why join a board, both in terms of what it is in general, like why join in general, but also that secondary question of kind of what's in it for me. So how should we think about boards as being kind of part of our professional development, part of our leadership development, as you were just talking about?
Well, I think being on board serves a number of roles that are valuable for society and valuable for you as an individual. The value to society is that there are so many efforts that we need to have work on to move our society forward that government isn't doing, can't do, or won't do. And a lot of times you have to demonstrate the possible before you can have public policy change to really implement the possible. And so I oftentimes think of nonprofit organizations as really being venture capitalists for social change.
Right.
You know, I have an idea that we could do we could educate poor kids better. How do I do it? Well, let's start a charter school and let's have a little bit different curriculum. Let's have a longer school day. Let's do other things and see if we get results. If we get results, now we can begin to lobby the legislature and school districts to follow that lead. But to get a school system to all of a sudden do something that's very novel, very different, and you're working with kids and taxpayer money, it's difficult to do.
Sure.
So across the range, if you look at a lot of social welfare things that are taking place, whether it's with foster youth, if it's trying to prevent recidivism, all of those sort of issues that are important to our society, it's usually nonprofit organizations that start off and show the possible, and then that creates the environment to try and have public policy change where you get more government funding. From a personal standpoint, I think that if there are things that you're passionate about, one, then working with a nonprofit organization is a way to give vent to that passion the same way, you know, you may go to a church or a synagogue or a temple because of a religious feeling you have, and so you support that organization for that. There may be things that you think are important about making society better. It could be everything from global warming to getting speed bumps placed on your street, and you know, you form an organization to try and make that happen, and you do that through the nonprofit sector.
The arts.
The arts. You know, there are lots of things that are enriching to our lives and to our community that are done by nonprofit organizations, and you need people to make that happen. And then finally, on a very, very personal level, the opportunity to have a leadership position, the opportunity to maybe engage in making public speeches. There are a lot of opportunities that can help you develop as a leader and as an individual in a nonprofit organization. You know, let's take like Toastmasters.
Right.
A lot of people learn how to do public speaking through a nonprofit organization like that.
Right.
A lot of people learn how to run a meeting. A lot of people learn how to get different factions of folks to work together by being in a nonprofit. So that helps you become a better leader, a better person. And so that is, you know, personal to you. And so I think that the nonprofit sector offers a lot of potentially positive things that can affect you as an individual.